Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. We're once again celebrating Halloween at a time of unprecedented spookiness. In 2025, code is Vide, AI generated capybaras do the Macarena, artificial agents roam the streets in search of unspent tokens. Asymmetric cryptography is not quantum safe. And late at night, if you listen closely, you can hear the blockchains rattle against the gates of the latest celebrity ICO, which means this week, we talk quantum threats with Martha Bennett and Sandy Carielli from Forrester Research.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest AppSec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. Ransomware, supply chain attacks, 0 days. Cyber threats don't wait, and neither should your defenses. With ThreatLocker, you're not just reacting to threats, you're stopping them before they start. Our Zero Trust endpoint protection locks down your environment with pinpoint control over what's allowed to run and what's not. No guesswork, no blind spots. Just proactive, built-for-now security that keeps your business moving. Want to see how a true default deny strategy works? Head over to securityweekly.com/threatlocker and take the first step towards shutting the door on threats before they even knock.
This is episode 354, recorded on Monday, October 27th, 2025. I'm your guest host, Adrian Sanabria, standing in for Mike Shima. And joining me, I have... Sorry, I'm having to switch this up a little bit. I do not have John with me today. Unfortunately, John had something come up, so we're running solo here. And 3 years ago on Halloween, Sandy Carielli and Martha Bennett joined us to discuss Web3 threats and defense. Is that right? Was it 3 years ago?
I think so, yeah.
All right.
Not long, wow.
Yeah, I went back and looked as well, and it was 2022. Looked like, I forget the episode number, I think it was like 418, something like that.
Then we were due.
Yeah. All right. Is that right? No, this is episode 354. Sorry, I run another podcast and we're in the 400s. So 218. It was probably 218 then. So you're both back to help us understand how the migration to post-quantum encryption is affecting blockchain and other systems. And Cindy, am I saying your name right?
Carielli, yes.
Carielli. Okay, great. You are VP now, Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. I think you got a promotion since you were last on the show.
I did, yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Also joining us, Martha, also VP, Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. Welcome, Martha.
Thank you. And good to be back.
Good to have you back. I love the theme. I love your costumes. I only regret not having one myself as I'm traveling at the moment. Otherwise, I would have some pirate-related stuff I could put on because that's just, I don't know, the natural go-to, like the lazy go-to for my hair.
The vibe works, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. All right. So jumping into this for people who, I can't imagine, most of the listeners aren't familiar with quantum computing and the impact to cybersecurity right now. But, for the sake of just laying some foundation here, maybe Sandy, could you give us kind of the lowdown on what's going on and why security folks are concerned about quantum computing?
Yeah, absolutely. Basically, what it comes down to is that, for years we have relied for asymmetric encryption for things like key exchange, for digital signatures, and we've relied on particular algorithms, RSA, elliptic curve in particular, and they've held up pretty well. We've been using them for a few decades now, increasing key size, but continuing to use them. As quantum computing has progressed and developed, one of the things that has been theoretically true for a while is that if a quantum computer was large and powerful enough, it would be able to execute Shor's algorithm in order to break RSA and ECC. And for years, this was more of a theoretical construct. But as quantum computing has progressed, it started to look closer, closer to now than some distant point in the future. And so the reason that security folks are talking about quantum security and talking about post-quantum encryption is the question of, what do we do now? How do we prepare for this if a quantum computer gets developed that is powerful enough? And because it takes a while to migrate cryptography, particularly public key cryptography that we have been using, as I said, for decades, this is a conversation that really started 10 years ago. And we have developed over time some post-quantum cryptography algorithms that would not be susceptible to a quantum computer. And now we're starting to get to the point where quantum computing could be getting closer to being able to break existing public key cryptography. And at the same time, there's no regulatory guidance in a lot of countries saying you need to migrate. So in short, the reason that this is an issue and a topic of conversation is we're closer now. This is at the front door. And while we don't know exactly when, we have to prepare, we have to plan, and we have to start doing this work of migration.
And exactly when comes with a name, right?
Are you talking about Q Day?
Yes. So if you hear the term Q Day, that's the what is Q Day specifically? What's the definition for Q Day?
So I have heard Q Day referred to as the point at which a quantum computer will be able to break a reasonably sized RSA or ECC key. Often it'll be talked about as, say, RSA 2048. The reality is it's not going to be a single Q Day that we have to be thinking about and that we're not going to have any clue about. It's more likely that we're going to see progress over time where if it can break a slightly smaller RSA key, that gives us a clue that it's getting closer and closer. So Q Day is a good way to talk about the point at which we're all in trouble. But the reality is we're going to likely have some warning about that because we're going to be able to break slightly smaller keys sooner.
Yeah, I like to think of it as the second best time to do your post-quantum crypto migration, which the first best time is hopefully before Q Day. Sorry, Martha, you're trying to say something.
Yeah, no, because what Sandy just mentioned is really, really important. And clearly, there's just one point I wanted to add why we are here now really talking about this. And because things actually changed in 2025. Yes, we've known about the threat from quantum computing for a long time. And actually, some people started working on their mitigation strategies a while back. But a few things have happened in 2025 that have increased the urgency with which we need to act. And without going into all of the details, but let's just say that there have been several breakthroughs in 2025, starting earlier in the year with a publication by a quantum scientist at Google, then several quantum companies working on hardware announcing breakthroughs. And, I don't want to particularly advertise anybody here, so I'll steer clear of names. But I was struck by one of them in September and the technical details are almost immaterial, but this company had in mind a date of something like 2029 or 2030 for their own internal milestone for achieving a particular breakthrough. They managed it this September. So in some ways, we've got like breakthroughs tumbling over each other. Now, let's also be clear, we are still quite a long way away from it. But at the same time, given that, if companies can surprise themselves at the speed with which they're able to achieve something, then we need to be prepared. And I think that's the point that we're really trying to get across here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a big unknown, and it's So maybe my next question here. So you mentioned Shor's algorithm is the actual algorithm that could be used to break a key with a quantum computer. Why is this different than just every other encryption algorithm upgrade, SSL to TLS or the protocols over the protocols, right? But we've decommissioned broken encryption before, right? We've moved away from SHA-1. We've moved away from MD5 for hashes and triple DES for encryption. What makes this different than those other migrations that we've done in the past?
So I'm going to list two different things here, Adrian. One of the things that makes it different is just how deeply rooted a lot of public key cryptography is in our infrastructure, and just the amount of effort we're going to have to undergo to find everything, to upgrade everything. I've compared SHA-1 to SHA-256 as swapping out your pipes from copper to, a more modern plastic or other type of material. Whereas migrating to post-quantum is potentially changing the shape of the pipes, changing the way they move around the house. There are potentially questions around storage and performance and a lot of other elements that have to be considered as you're doing it. That's one part of it. Here's the other part of it. Public key cryptography is how we do key exchange, and it's how we do digital signing. And both of those things have a lot of impact in terms of protecting our data. If we're not able to migrate to post-quantum in time, a couple of things happen. One, attackers are potentially already harvesting data that's traveling over the public internet. There's an attack that's commonly called harvest now, decrypt later. Basically, take data that's traveling, steal it, put it aside somewhere, don't do anything with it until a quantum computer exists that you can decrypt it with. And then you go ahead, you decrypt it, and you look for hidden gems. You look for things that are of value to you. That's one part of it, and that's part of the urgency. And then the other piece of it, going back to it, is the digital signing. And I'm going to have Martha chime in a minute because it is very tied to her blockchain research as well. But digital signing is how you establish trust in a lot of different things online. It's how you establish trusted transactions and signatures and trusted email and all of these pieces that if we don't migrate and we have a quantum computer that can break these things, that trust goes away. And so trying to catch up to that is a really big challenge. But the blockchain element of this is very interesting. So I'm going to turn that over to Martha.
Well, and Martha, before you begin there, I just want to emphasize the importance there that when a lot of people think about cryptography, they only think about confidentiality. They only think about the encryption. But this sounds like this is an integrity piece here as well, right? Go ahead, Martha.
Yeah, and no, I'm glad you mentioned that because that's indeed quite often the reaction that, yeah, but on a blockchain you're not encrypting things anyway in the sense of turning clear text into ciphertext and then back again. This is about signing mainly. This is about the entire trust in the infrastructure. And then just to make, which means, and when we say blockchain, let's just remind ourselves that every single cryptocurrency, every single stable coin, every single meme coin, every single NFT, all of that runs on blockchains, mostly public blockchains, but also some private permissioned blockchains. And we can come back to that, what that actually means in terms of making it quantum safe. But we've been talking about Schwar's algorithm, the one that allows us to basically mess with the signatures in this particular instance, RSA and anything elliptic curve based, which is, what today's blockchains run on. And a couple of things that make it more challenging actually with blockchains is we'll come back to what it takes to upgrade something, but also it's not just upgrading. When you look at how blockchains work, they're just in some cases really large distributed system where any additional latency is extremely bad news. Well, the key lengths of quantum safe algorithms, and Sandy knows more about this than I do, but just looking at some of the tables of how long the computation takes with those quantum safe keys, it's that in itself is a challenge. But let's just come back. The one blockchain that I'll just name by name because it is kind of different, and that's Bitcoin. It's obviously also the one that's been running the longest. It has an additional challenge to the others, and that's a different algorithm. It's called Grover's. Because Grover's
The
essentially
symmetric. That's the attack against
it's
symmetric.
more about, because Bitcoin uses this thing called proof of work, which is essentially about finding a nonce. That's what Grover's algorithm could do faster. So you could theoretically front run all the Bitcoin miners. I say theoretically because there are people who say that, somebody actually used the phrase to me, Grover's algorithm is kind of finicky. Meaning that you need some really, really clean qubits to run this. So maybe that threat is less, but I just thought I'd throw it in. There are quite a few things that people are just not thinking about with the urgency they should. And the reason I say this somewhat acerbically is that when I talk with companies wanting to somehow get into the stablecoin ecosystem, including stablecoin issuers, when I say, okay, so what are you doing about quantum safety? Well, it's not our blockchain. Yeah, but you're issuing your coin on this blockchain and it isn't quantum safe. Shouldn't you be thinking about this? It's kind of troubling how little thought there seems to be being paid to this by some.
Yeah, it's a really good point because honestly, I hadn't considered it before preparing for this interview, and I've given quite a few talks on quantum computing's impact on cybersecurity, and just hadn't considered blockchain because blockchain, and there's at least one threat actor that we found is almost entirely focused on stealing cryptocurrency, right? So it's a very different incentive structure than we see in other cyber attacks.
And in fact, can I just pick you up on the point about incentive structure? And then I'll also hand over to Sandy for her perspective, because one of the things that at least I have found people are being confused about, you mentioned Q-Day earlier. And that people then say, oh, does that mean that I can just use quantum computers to do this, that, and the other? And the answer is not necessarily, because the advances that we're making, and that's why I picked you up on that threat actor point, is it is likely that the first at-scale use of a quantum machine will be by an adversarial nation state or an entity sponsored by an adversarial nation state. And they don't care about how much it costs because they just want to do this, whether it's financial gain or just wreaking havoc on an economy by interfering with essential services.
Yeah, Sandy.
Yeah, so thinking about this from the security perspective, as Martha and I started to work together on this, what really got my attention was none of the major blockchain platforms today are quantum safe. None of them. And the migration plans, those that even have migration plans, and many do not, a couple have shared migration plans. Those migration plans are not elegant. They're kind of messy. Most of them seem to involve hard forks. Like, this is not a thing that's going to be easy peasy for everyone that's involved in supporting a particular blockchain or implementation. There's work to be done. And that's for the blockchains that actually have a plan. Not everyone does. One of the things that got my attention on this was, there isn't an easy way to migrate, but even the one or two startups who are claiming to have a quantum safe implementation of a blockchain, maybe using a particular post-quantum algorithm, that's great until you ask them about what their agility plan is. What happens if that particular post-quantum algorithm is broken? And they also do not have a migration plan.
Yeah.
So what is, there's an aspect of what's the long-term plan here? Like, how do you continue to manage this without having to do, in the best case, Martha, a series of hard forks? And in the worst case, I have no clue.
Yeah.
And also because, and let's just sort of unravel things a bit, because everybody throws around the term decentralization a lot of the time. And quite frankly, a lot of what we're seeing is decentralization theater, meaning that when you look long and hard, you actually do find a single entity who controls the code, and who has very direct control either over the nodes themselves or over the other entities that control the nodes. And when I say easier, all things being relative on that spectrum that Sandy alluded to, it's still very hard. But if you have control and you can say, thou shalt do this, it's more likely to happen than if you're trying to herd the cat around thousands and thousands of nodes and convincing everybody to do an upgrade or whatever. Or indeed, I've seen with some of the blockchains that are out there, other than, as Sandy already said, some actually know what they need to do and specifically say, we know what we need to do, but we're waiting actually to see whether things might become less compute intensive or there might be other developments. So they're at least thinking about it. Then there are others who say to individuals who are coin holders saying, hey, you can actually make your coins quantum safe today, but you really need to be very, very tech savvy to do this. And then when you look at what's happening at the moment, where loads of mainstream financial services firms, well-known firms, are going more in the direction of stable coins. And, you hear the phrase, this is going to be the way that cross-border money transfers will happen, and so on and so forth. It gets scary.
So we're going to extinguish my knowledge of blockchain and cryptocurrencies very quickly here, but this jump to quantum safe cryptography, is this going to affect because I understand enough to know that Bitcoin is supposed to get progressively more difficult to mine over time, right? Is this jump to a different algorithm or different post-quantum cryptography, is that going to represent a jump in the difficulty to mine the coin itself that might disincentivize doing so?
No, it doesn't. That algorithm is a self-adjusting algorithm that does what it does. I've mentioned that there's a chance that Grover's algorithm could make a mess of mining in the sense that it could front run it. But that's not where the real threat comes from. And I also want to stress that's purely pertaining to the Bitcoin blockchain or anything else that uses this proof of work mechanism. All the other blockchains, including the biggest, Ethereum, they long ago, I say long ago, a few years ago, moved away from that towards something called proof of stake. And so there are different mechanisms out there which as such aren't affected, but what really is a challenge is just the compute intensity of those quantum safe algorithms, which essentially slow down the transaction rate, might even cause issues with synchronization, which of course also has implications. And so that's where there are still a lot of uncertainties as to how you can actually run the network. So you're quite right about being concerned about other side effects of what these upgrades mean.
So Sandy, jumping back over to you, cryptography, I think a lot of people don't, aren't aware of all the places that cryptography happens, right? And it happens in some remarkably small and unassuming IoT devices, right? Especially when we're talking about payments infrastructure and things like that. You mentioned and Martha mentioned as well the increased compute that might be needed, for these new algorithms. Do you anticipate devices needing to be replaced entirely to be able to handle this?
So there are a couple of approaches because in theory, yes, but reality check, there are certain devices. I mean, there are OT devices, Adrian, that have been operating nonstop for decades.
Yeah.
No one's going to replace those. And there are IoT devices deployed in remote environments that you're probably not going to replace. And the scale of the IoT deployment is going to make it difficult to replace everything. So those are some of the challenges. Here is where I start to become a fan of proxy-based solutions and crypto agility tools that use some sort of proxy approach to move the cryptography outside of the device. Because the reality is you're not going to replace all those devices. It'd be, I guess, good if you could, although maybe not, because that's also expensive and a lot of work.
Right.
And one of the advantages of a proxy-based approach for cryptographic agility is that you don't have to upgrade the devices and you don't have to spend all this time making changes. Not just this time, by the way. What happens in 10 years, whatever, when maybe one of these post-quantum algorithms gets broken? These haven't stood up the test of time for decades like RSA. We don't know how long they're going to last. It's very likely there are going to be more changes. Getting to quantum security isn't necessarily a long-term end state. So I look at cryptographic agility and proxy-based approaches as a way of helping to mitigate the risk here, because then you can, next time there's a change, next time there's a new algorithm, you don't have to swap out all of the devices. You make a new choice in your orchestration layer for the proxies. And that's probably how you're going to have to do that for a lot of these, because, we're not going to swap out millions of devices every 10 years.
Right. And, you brought up crypto agility a couple times. The way that I like to describe this to folks is imagine all your website certificates are going to expire tomorrow and Let's Encrypt goes away, right? Like how quickly could you switch to a different certificate provider, particularly if you have hundreds or thousands of websites and you're automating the process of generating those certificates. But of course, it's not just a certificate provider, but it could be a library you have to swap out, could be a cipher, could be as simple as a configuration change or a complete rip and replace of OpenSSL or something like that, right?
Yep, exactly. You're potentially swapping out cryptographic libraries in code that you're developing. You've got things that are implemented in the firmware of various hardware devices you have. You've got, back to what you were saying at the beginning of this, Adrian, cryptography is everywhere. And it's in the depths of all of this. It's in the depths of the software. It's in the depths of the hardware. And so...
Very spooky.
Yeah. There's a reason we're doing this on Halloween.
Yeah.
This is the perfect Halloween episode in some ways, but it's it's there. And so knowing that there are so many places where you have to do this work to upgrade and replace, yes, getting to quantum security is the near-term goal. The long-term goal is cryptographic agility, so you don't have to do this again. So you don't have to go through this multi-year exercise of categorizing and upgrading everything. You've done it once. You've done the discovery. You continue to upgrade the inventory, and then you try to keep things up to date. And there are always going to be challenges, but you want to try to reduce your surface area here.
And if I can pick up on something there, that's something that really struck me while we were conducting our research interviews, is the phrase we kept hearing time and again was something along the lines of, all the surprises we got when we did the cryptographic discovery.
Yeah.
Yep.
Like outdated cryptography. We didn't even realize we ever used this algorithm, or we didn't realize this was still running. It's that, we didn't realize complete sentence with whatever horror story you wish. With what Sandy just articulated, that we shouldn't have to do again either, and not have those surprises again, aside from the inventory. And of course, there's one bit that also comes into it, which you didn't ask, but I'll mention it anyway, and then I'll hand it back to Sandy, is that, of course, you're not necessarily in direct control over all of this. Your hardware or software provider may be, but you can't just sit back and assume that they're dealing with it.
Right. And not only that, but a lot of encryption is opportunistic, right? When my email server talks to your email server, they have to agree on what to use, right? or same thing for web browser and web server. If and I remember a time when not everything was HTTPS, right? And one day you couldn't log into a website unless you were using HTTPS or unless you were using a new enough browser. So it seems like this is good in a way because now we have an incentive structure. All the hyperscalers switch to post quantum crypto. The Google starts down rating your SEO if you haven't done it. Those sorts of things kind of drag people into the cryptographic future. I think. I don't know if there's a similar one for blockchain or if that there's going to be a long tail of IoT and internal stuff, right? That's not necessarily going to get drug along there. So I don't know what we do for all that.
But you're hitting, Adrian, on one of the reasons that I advocate so strongly for the risk team to be involved in this process. Because what you're describing there is a third-party risk issue.
Yeah.
If the vendors and the partners that you're working with don't interoperate with you anymore because they don't support post-quantum, that's a problem. So one of the big roles, and we can talk about all the different stakeholders and personas that need to be involved in this
You'll
migration.
have one website you have to use like a 3-year-old version of Firefox to log into, right?
Right. We can't do that. So.
Oh, but we have in the past.
Yes. But so you get to this point, you need your third-party risk folks to be identifying who are our key vendors, key partners, where we're communicating, sharing data. There are dependencies among us that we need to be on them and understanding what's their timeline. Are they going to be migrating and be ready in line with our timeline? And by the way, if they aren't, what's our backup plan? What's our mitigation plan for that?
Generative AI is powerful, but it comes with real risks, from prompt injection to data leakage misuse and agentic AI. The OWASP Gen AI Security Project unites a global community of expert practitioners who tackle these challenges every day. Together, they've built practical playbooks, adoption guides, and the OWASP Top 10 for LLMs, resources any team can apply right now to strengthen AI security. And it doesn't stop there. This is open source, built by practitioners, for practitioners, working together to secure generative AI. Visit securityweekly.com/OWASP to use the playbooks and join the effort to protect tomorrow's intelligence today.
I've actually just had another thought, Sandy, that when you were talking, what Ira was reminded of. Not all countries will be adopting the same NIST algorithms, will they?
Oh, yeah. Yep. That's...
Yeah.
Yes,
I can't
thank
imagine
you for
China's going to be using the same ones that we're using and Europe is using.
But not just China.
Russia, yeah.
South Korea. South Korea has adopted different algorithms than we have. And even in Europe, while a lot of the EU countries have adopted the NIST algorithms, a couple of countries have left it open to adopt additional ones. And I think it's the Netherlands that is adopting somewhat different ones. So it is not consistent across the board.
What they'll adopt, I think, remains kind of open. But yes, certainly, if you look at that list that's been published, the Netherlands certainly has something on there that's not on the NIST list.
And the when is different per country, I've noticed as well.
Oh, yes. This is a conversation I like to have with folks because we'll have this in the US. The NIST and CISA requirements are that RSA and ECC will be deprecated in 2030 and disallowed in 2035. And okay, you look at that and think, well, all right, I really have to worry about the disallowed, right? The deprecated I can get through. Well, that's great unless you want to do business with, I don't know, Australia, which doesn't have a two-stage process and everything's disallowed after 2030.
Yeah, or I think the EU is similar.
Something
like 2030 as well.
The EU has a phased approach in that, and we'll actually see the end of next year maybe how that timetable may be going, because the first milestone is, according to the currently published roadmap, that by the end of 2026 everybody will have done their cryptographic inventory. And then the idea is you laugh, excuse me, I said this with a straight face.
I'm impressed, honestly.
Yeah, but the idea is that by 2030 highly mission critical systems that's public services. That's obviously anything to do with money movement, your savings and everything. That's supposed to be quantum safe by 2030 and the rest by 2035. Possibly in recognition of the fact that companies, in particular banks who've been actually at this for quite a while now, are already saying there's no way we can do this. We've done our cryptographic inventory, and based on that, we know there's no way we can do all of it by 2030. And that's again why we keep going on and on. If you haven't started yet, you're going to have a tough time.
And it seems like we have gotten away with not having cryptographic inventories for a long time. Like maybe some companies have been doing it, but I venture a guess that most have not. So it seems like this is a good opportunity for folks to start doing this, because I imagine most folks are going to have a phased approach. Like if it's something that's internal connections, that's going to be deprioritized when compared to stuff, touching the public, I would imagine.
I think you're going to have a lot of prioritization in this. I think, to some of the points that have been made, what's public facing is going to matter, what requires digital signing is going to matter, what data is being transmitted. Is it customer facing? Is it long lived? Because long lived data is much more susceptible to harvest now, decrypt later, because it still is going to matter in 10 years. All of that comes into play, which is why you need some of this. The thing about cryptographic inventory, Adrian, that I think is important here is that, we've been recommending it for years, but up to this point, up to a few years ago, what were your options to actually do it? It was primarily a spreadsheet. And a spreadsheet exercise is nobody's idea of a good time. What we're seeing now is we're starting to finally see tooling that is developed to automate the cryptographic inventory. And that's really important. And that's going to help things out along the way, because now you've got some options to automate this, to make it ongoing and continuous so that you have a much better record. And we needed it. This is the time where we do need it because of everything that's going on. But part of why this hasn't happened until now is we didn't really have easy tools to use to do it.
Yeah, and it does, I think, justify some custom tooling here, because eventually your vulnerability scan will tell you that you're using old encryption, right? That's been the thing that's pestered us in the past. If you're on old SSL or have old ciphers enabled and things like that. But they're not doing it today, and I went out and looked. I couldn't find any indication when they would start doing that. And there are websites you can go. You can plug in the name of a website, the domain of a website, and it'll scan it and pull out all the cryptographic details. Those aren't telling you who is or isn't quantum safe at this point yet, and no indication as to when they're going to start doing that. So for people that want to start their migration now, it seems like your only option is to go out and find somebody who's built one of these post-quantum inventory tools.
It certainly,
am I wrong about that? Or
well, it certainly accelerates the process. It makes it, could you do it in a manual way? If you looked manually, okay, these are the devices we have. These are the things deployed in our infrastructure. Let's take a look at how they're configured. Could you do it manually? It wouldn't be fun, but you could. Could you look at all of the application software that you develop and look at what cryptographic libraries are in place and look at what algorithms are configured? Wouldn't be fun, but you could do it. But it's hard to do that on an ongoing, continuous basis. It's hard to validate changes, all of this stuff. So it was technically feasible before, but having good cryptographic inventory tooling makes this much easier and much more likely that people will do it, in my opinion.
and should a lot of them have quantum in the name, and I keep thinking, should this just be a cryptographic inventory tool, not a quantum cryptographic inventory
Correct.
tool, right?
Yeah, I think you help yourself by taking quantum out of the naming for some of these long term, because as we talked about, this is ultimately about cryptographic management and cryptographic agility.
And agility,
Right. Quantum's the near term problem you're solving. In 10, 15 years, we may not be talking about it. Sorry, Martha, go ahead.
No. I was just something again that occurred to me because of conversations we keep having, or indeed the question that I got from an audience member. I don't know who it was. It came in via Slido at our own event a couple of weeks ago, when I had actually put quantum security, quantum safety front and center of an emerging technology panel. And the question that came in, we've got so many other things to do. Can't we leave this until later? And aside from, how do I answer this politely? And the short answer, of course, is not really, if you care about your company. But it is actually important as well because we are in this, and unlike with Y2K, and that's why I don't like having Q-Day and Y2K kind of put in the same bucket, because Y2K was actually a definitive date. And we knew what we needed to fix, and we knew when we needed to fix it by. And with Q-Day, we don't know this. And in fact, we've heard from more than one company that they'd actually rather have regulators put in place some, legislation that obliges you to put quantum safety in place, because it's easier to get funding for projects that are directly compliance related. Sounds cynical, but that's the way it is. But we haven't got that. But one argument that I would put forward all the time, and I'll ask Sandy to back this up because I'm not the security expert in this room, and that is, regardless of when Q-Day arrives, you'll have a much, much better security posture if you do this work.
I mean, no question.
You'll actually know your stuff that you have, right?
Yeah. Well, in an ideal world, Q-Day, when Q-Day happens, you're already so far along in your migration that it's just an additional thing that's taking place, that you're already there, that you've already addressed it, that you're already well on your way. Q-Day becomes a problem if you're not prepared. If if it hits sooner than we think it's going to hit, and we're not far enough along in our migration, that's a problem. If there was suddenly a major advance in quantum computing and Q-Day happened 6 months from now, would there be panic? Yes, of course there would. But if it's 3 years, 4 years, 5 years from now, and everyone's well on their way to migration, and a lot of the timelines I'm seeing, as we've talked about earlier, we're seeing a lot of the hyperscalers, we're seeing a lot of the CDN providers, we're even seeing some of the hardware providers already get to this point where they're adding post-quantum support. If we've got that, if we've adopted that, and more people are further along, then by the time Q-Day hits, maybe we're kind of okay. Yeah. Hopefully.
And that's actually where I would put a differentiation between quantum safety overall and blockchains, in particular the public blockchains, because of some of the difficulties outlined earlier. And one of the things that we talked about key length and compute time, there is also key length and storage. And so there are additional challenges with blockchains where, as I think I already alluded to this, where they say we don't even want to move faster than we are because it just would destroy too much or be too hard or whatever. So that's where some of the differences come in with some of these systems that run on architectures that really aren't suited, unless they're the more modern ones. This is why I mentioned as well, whatever I'm saying, there is no one size fits all for public blockchains. They are differently architected, they use different consensus mechanisms, they are of different sizes, the way they're controlled is different, so you need to look at every single protocol on its own merit. And with some, you'll go to the website and you'll find, even with one of them, the first sentence, we architected this from the get-go with crypto agility in mind, or something, didn't we? Wasn't it something like that, Sandy?
Yeah. Yes.
Which is a long way ahead from somebody who doesn't even publicly acknowledge that, yes, we will need to do something.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting. Like I also, Martha, hear some of the same things that you were hearing from an attendee, where it's a very common thing to hear. CISO has 37 things on their list of absolute must get done. But the resources to do 10 of them in any given year, right? So there's this stuff that just gets pushed down below that. That bar where they have resources every year. It gets, those projects get pushed back and pushed back and pushed back, because there's no active threat against them. And so, yeah, it seems like regulation and maybe the rest of the industry, moving without you, that's going to push a lot of this. But Sandy, I wonder what your thoughts are on, it seems like some of this is just going to update without any work on the enterprise's behalf, right? Like I'm just going to app get update and I'll get the new algorithms, right? Like my iPhone will just get them. Like I'm not going to put post quantum crypto on my iPhone or in Chrome. Some of these things will auto update, but a lot of these things will absolutely not. It is entirely on the enterprise. So I imagine that's part of the inventory process, is to kind of
Yeah.
separate out like what stuff is on auto and is going to update itself, and what stuff do I have to go fix it manually myself? And maybe a third category, where do I have to go yell at my vendor and get them to do it?
You're right on, because that is part of the process. I would say it's part of not just the inventory process, but that prioritization and execution implementation process. You're going to have a list of areas where you've got old public key algorithms. And then some of this stuff, okay, if it's in a CDN and the CDN is in the process of migrating everyone anyway, fantastic. I'm going to be in good shape in 6 months, for example. If it's in a particular piece of hardware and the hardware vendor has publicized an upgrade plan and said basically our next versions are going to be ready on this date, and that aligns pretty well with your hardware refresh cycles, fantastic. But what about when your hardware vendor's plans don't align with your refresh cycles and your timelines? And what about when a third party, either a vendor or a partner that you're working with, their timelines don't fit with yours? That's where all of this comes into play, really understanding not just what you have, but then what do you have to do? Where do you have to do the work? Where do you need your developers to do things? Where do you need infrastructure? And where do you need to start pushing your partners, pushing your vendors?
Or you're still using Windows 7, right?
Well, look, that's the thing. Inventory, the entire inventory and discovery process, you're going to find junk. You're going to find stuff that you're going to look at and be, wow, we still have that. Okay, how cute, but we're used to that. And I would caution against viewing that with any embarrassment or shame or anything like that, because everyone's at that place. Great. It's your opportunity to get out of it. Don't spend too much time yelling at each other about it. Just now that we know we have it, let's go upgrade it. Let's go. We've got to deal with it before we can even think about being quantum ready.
Yeah.
So let's just do it.
And
I worked for, go ahead, Martha.
Now, I was just going to pick up another point that where Sandy has a few times mentioned the word prioritization, which obviously is absolute key, and we've all used that word. One aspect that companies also need to do, and again, this is purely based on some of the conversations I've had, is actually prioritizing your data as well, if you haven't already done it. And that's very much as well under the harvest now, decrypt later, because that is around what data do you need to protect the most? And of course, those threats are already here today. And it's we talked about data in motion. There's also data at rest. When you read about companies discovering they had some form of infiltration that actually happened in 2023 and was discovered in 2025, what walked out the door in the background? And so it's taking a different approach to how you classify and protect your data, in terms of what is your most precious, but also focuses the mind on what might actually have it might be really, really confidential this week, but who cares in 2029 what pricing you had in
Right.
2025 or whatever.
Right. Like yeah, and you really have to think about that. Like my favorite example are press releases, which are extremely secret until they're extremely public, right?
Honestly, even credit card data. If I go online tomorrow and I buy a laptop and I pay with my credit card and that's harvested, okay, and maybe that's decrypted in 5 years, but my credit card expired 2 years before that, and I don't care.
Right.
But if I log into, I don't know, my doctor's office and I download results of some tests, well, that's still relevant. My healthcare information is still relevant, 5 years, 10 years from now. So I really want to make sure that, my doctor's office is protecting that data long term. And ideally, protecting it as soon as possible, because even something that's harvested tomorrow is still going to be relevant in 10 years, potentially.
And that actually also brings us back to the wonderful, scary blockchain topic, because that's, again, it's not a new thing. Using a blockchain-based system to ensure data integrity and data provenance. You hash the data to the chain, and then if somebody wants to, we're all familiar with that principle. But then when you look at, let's do that with health records, let's do that with codicils to wills, and so on and so forth. Yes, Sandy, I think your facial expression says it all.
Yep.
All of that. So this is not just about your cryptocurrencies, your coins and your apes or whatever. It's also about much more important things where, with the best will in the world, people try to add an element of security and integrity, but are actually adding potential exposure.
Yeah, I saw yesterday that people, 23andMe users who had their genetic data stolen or exposed, were being offered some kind of like genetic monitoring, like they do credit monitoring.
What does that actually do?
What is that going to do? Yeah. So basically what it does is it just tells you if any of your data shows up on the dark web. That's all they're doing. Like it still doesn't help you. It just lets you know that it's out there, and it's
I mean, if it's been taken, I think you can assume it's out there. I don't know that you need to be told that it's out there every time.
Yeah.
Eek.
Yeah, but it's a really good point, and it's a lot to think about there, and it is I think very tied to understanding your data, right, and understanding those data flows. So that's a very common. So tomorrow at an in-person IANS forum, I'm going to be talking about both these topics. I'm going to be talking about data provenance and lineage, and quantum.
Nice.
The quantum impact of security, and I do see them kind of both going together, because they're both places where, when people do those inventories, there's a lot of, I didn't realize that we had that data on the system. That data shouldn't be on this system, right? This thing should have been upgraded years ago, but it's still here.
So here's our opportunity to fix it. That's why we're here today, to tell you to start that inventory so you can actually, 1, prioritize your migration, and 2, move out the data that you shouldn't have there anyway.
Yeah. So where should folks, I guess with an inventory, we talked about prioritization. Where should people start with this?
So I look at this as, a fairly straightforward approach to build out your roadmap. You start with the discovery and inventory, you go through that prioritization, and then you use that to say, okay, these are the pieces we have to make sure we migrate and address first. And you're building out a multi-year roadmap in that. At the same time, ideally, you're building in crypto agility while you do that implementation, because otherwise you're missing an opportunity.
Yeah.
But those are the how. The other piece of this that I don't want to leave without making sure people are thinking about is the who, Because yes, security is playing a pretty large role in this, but this is more than a security issue. You're going to need a cross-functional team. You're going to need partners. You need people from infrastructure because of all of the upgrades and replacement, whether that's what you have in the cloud, what you've got for hardware in your data center, all of that. You're going to need your development team because they're probably going to be replacing a bunch of cryptographic libraries in your applications. You're going to need, frankly, your emerging tech leaders who are going to keep an eye on all of these announced quantum advances and tell you which ones are actually going to impact the timeline so that you can respond appropriately. You're going to need your third-party risk folks to be helping to identify any risks with vendors and partners and make sure you're staying on top of them. And then also, you're going to need your procurement team, because your procurement team is going to help make sure that for all this good work you're doing, that you're not buying new stuff that introduces additional risk. So
needs to go on the questionnaire, right? New questions for the questionnaire. Yeah.
Yep. New questions for the RFP. Absolutely. And those are the things where it's one thing to know what you have to do, but make sure you really have buy-in across the team. And you've got all of these different personas and stakeholders involved, because this is not just a security mission. This is much bigger than that.
Yeah.
And if I were to
Any
look at it,
final thoughts, Martha?
Looking at it through the blockchain lens, I mean, everything that Sandy just said, except, of course, the proportions are somewhat different in that there's only a handful of people who are actually building new blockchains today, but there are people building new blockchains. So please, if you can make them quantum safe from the get-go, at the very least, make sure you build in the crypto agility that you need, and as Sandy has eloquently described. For anybody already...
Include that in your AI prompts. When you have your AI prompts, build your new crypto.
Make it crypto agile.
And obviously, the teams that are working on that, they know what they need to do, and those that aren't working seriously enough yet, please do so. But most importantly, all of the companies who are seeking to get into the stablecoin ecosystem, who are looking to use blockchains for data integrity for whatever, really, really have a very serious discussions with the company, the entity you're engaging with, the blockchain you're intending to use, or the blockchain that third party is using to issue your stablecoin, whatever the scenario is. Make sure that you're having that conversation and you know what the roadmap is. Otherwise, down the line, you might have some very nasty surprises.
And there is a bit of a tradition on this podcast for this year. Mike has been asking all the guests to describe AppSec in 3 words. I think, Martha, for you, we can do blockchain in 3 words. But we can maybe edit this if you need a moment to think about it.
So I'm going to take a shift on this and just do quantum in 3 words, since that's what we're really talking about on this one. And I think if I'm going to do the 3 words, team, inventory, prioritize.
All right. Martha?
The reason I hesitate is that I come up with 4. I say blockchains don't replace trust.
I like that. We'll bend the rules for it. I'll allow it as the guest host. All right, Sandy and Martha, thank you so much for joining me today in this very special Halloween episode. This has been delightful.
Thanks for having us, Adrian.
Thanks for having us, indeed.
All right, to the audience, thanks for joining us. And Mike will be back next week, and we'll see you then.